Good afternoon. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Capetta. I'm a workflow solutions architect with Dell Boomi. My area of specialty is a tool called Boomi Flow. It was actually an acquisition a little less than a year ago by Dell Boomi of a company called ManyWho. So we'll go ahead and talk through a bit about the Boomi integration capabilities, as well as this workflow offering that really complements it quite nicely by bringing in the human engagement layer to these previously system-to-system integrations. So we'll start off with a little bit of question and answer to you guys. How many folks typically use data from more than one application in your day-to-day tasks? Show of hands. Cool, thank you. Second and last question. Would you benefit by some sort of automation in these tasks and in these data synchronizations between systems? Another show of hands, please. Thank you. Cool. Those were softballs. Much appreciated. So we're here to talk about those sorts of connected experiences. Digital innovation is, of course, accelerating very quickly. You see it every day. You see it all across this conference room floor. Customers are demanding those engaged processes. Dell Boomi really likes to think that we have a solution that does help deliver those engaged customer experiences. Dell Boomi is really a unified stack that has an integration layer. This is really where Dell Boomi has built its name. And then Boomi Flow is this newer addition that adds UI generation capabilities. It adds the rules and the routing that you would typically see in a BPM sort of tool. You'll hear me use the term purest workflow layer across the next 15 minutes or so. And that's really what Boomi Flow seeks to be. It wants to be that lightweight orchestration layer that complements and augments the systems that you would already have in place. So we're going to talk a little bit about the full Boomi suite of products. I mentioned that Dell Boomi really built its name on integration. The Atomsphere integration platform is a drag and drop set of tools to build integrations. I'm pretty confident saying if a thing can be integrated to, Dell Boomi can integrate to it. What you see over the top of these EDI, API, and integration components is this low-code workflow layer, and that's really the focus of this particular talk. This workflow layer can go in a couple different directions. It can be from the appy sense, generating customer-facing, device-responsive mobile applications. Those can be web applications. They can also be packaged up to be installed natively. So in that sense, we'll talk a little bit about how you can use Flow to build a mobile app sort of customer-engaged feel. Before we get into that, we'll talk a little bit about how you could use Flow as a BPM-type tool. It really excels at those rules, roles, and routing that you would think of at the BPM tool, and particularly by complementing a system of record like Salesforce, it does work really nicely in that BPM long-running sort of space. So we'll talk about the vision of Flow compared to BPM first. I've mentioned this purest workflow layer, where it really seeks to be the low-code building engine that you would use to automate these long-running processes. These might be the sort of long 3-week processes that involve many different departments. Flow can provide that set of rails that really orchestrates what different groups and what different individuals might be coming in at any given time. Where a traditional BPM would include some of those system of record components, a database, perhaps an analytics module, as well as the roles and the UI. Flow really seeks to isolate the roles, the UI generation, and then those different routing steps to complement its responsive UI. So in short, we think this is the direction that the BPM space is going, business process management, of course. And we really like to look at it as that orchestration layer that's augmenting and complementing the systems of record and the tools that you would already have in place. So we've taken a look at Flow from the BPM sort of use case. Now we're going to shift tracks a little bit and take a look at it from the customer-facing, perhaps mobile application direction. You think of building an application in the traditional method, it requires a fair bit of legwork before you even get to implementing your idea. You're standing up infrastructure, you're standing up the different security measures. It might take 15 lines of code to have your icon look good on the various devices that are coming through. It's, of course, long gone the days of a traditional 1080 by 720 screen. So in the traditional method, you would have a lot of legwork going in prior to implementing your idea, prior to delivering that idea to either your internal customers or your external customers. Boomi Flow streamlines this by handling those infrastructure and security considerations. So it becomes a drag and drop canvas that you're using to configure applications, and underneath that canvas, Flow is really handling all of the infrastructure, all of the security in a way that you can configure applications with the drag and drop toolset, you can publish them, and you can be engaging with them very quickly. So we'll spend a little bit of time taking a look at how someone would build an application with Flow. I'll call your attention to the graphic in the middle. This is the canvas that someone would actually be using to build their applications. You notice the rectangular elements, as we call them. These would be the components that someone is actually using to build an app or a flow. I'll use those terms interchangeably. The blue elements are responsive UI. That has Bootstrap built right in so that they will look good on any device. It is low code, no code, and I like to call it that because you could absolutely build device agnostic applications and then deliver them to your internal or external customers without having to touch a line of code. But it creeps into the low-code area because it's certainly extensible. We've used industry standard web development frameworks, HTML5, JavaScript. It has the Bootstrap I mentioned for the responsiveness, and the components are React-based. So if somebody wanted to come in and either extend our existing components or build them in a way that they might go more in line with their business processes, it's extensible and it's versatile in that way. So that's where I define low-code, no-code. So I mentioned the blue rectangles are responsive UI. The greens and the reds are much more behind the scenes. That's where you're pushing and pulling data. That's where you're performing those manipulations and those different data routing executions. I'll also call your attention to the orange swim lanes that surround some of these elements. This tool has a concept of identity that it can use from an outside tool. So in the example of Flow leveraging Salesforce, it could be that these swim lanes are based on a user, an internal role structure that's defined within Salesforce. It could be that it's based on a group. I have a number of demos where we've built these swim lanes to only allow access to certain steps for members of a particular chatter group. This can be really compelling when it comes into a long-running sort of process in which your IT team, then your HR team, and then your administrative team might all come in at various parts over a 2 or a 3 week long process. So those swim lanes do include the ability to go down to very granular levels with the permission on any given flow or portion of a flow. I've mentioned at the beginning this purest workflow layer that this tool really seeks to be, and I think that'll be highlighted by one of these message elements, one of the green elements that you'll see near the top. If you think of a drag and drop tool to build approvals or a drag and drop tool to build bots, you would picture one of these drag and drop components as the mechanism by which you're configuring a specific variety of approval or a specific bot response type. We want it to be this purest workflow layer in that these components and these elements are versatile enough to leverage a great many different sorts of tools. So circling back around to the example of a message element in this top swim lane, that message element with a Salesforce service could be creating a task within Salesforce. It could be triggering a task email within Salesforce. The same message element with a Twilio service could be sending a text message and waiting for a response. That response can then be passed through a decision criteria, a business rule, and the flow can route differently depending on this SMS or this email response. As a third example use for that message element, you might even have it triggering internal message actions to Boomi. It might be that it's launching another flow. It could spin out 3, 5, 10 child flows that the parent flow could be actively waiting for completion on. It could be that this is triggering an Atomsphere integration process where you leverage that full range of integration capabilities that the Boomi Atomsphere iPaaS offering includes, and you go out and you maybe bring back data from one or multiple systems in a way that it can be surfaced and it can be leveraged with Flow. Before I shift off this slide, I will call your attention to the security accreditations along the right column. We are able to support those compliances. Some of our strongest customers are in the healthcare and financial spaces. We'll take a look at a couple particular use cases and particular spaces where this tool has received a really strong amount of traction, and then we'll circle around to really tie it off on how this integrates to Salesforce and how it plays nicely with the Salesforce ecosystem. So first, field service is an area that has been receiving a tremendous amount of positive response because of the device agnostic nature of these applications. You picture someone out on a remote oil rig, someone that's in the field performing medicine. To have that sort of flow on a tablet becomes a very useful thing. One item that I have not yet mentioned is the ability to bring these flows offline. So we are typically rendering them as a web application. We can use Apache Cordova to really create a package that could be installed on a native device. We've added an offline piece by which you could actually have a flow offline enabled in a way that someone could be out in the field in remote, non-connected areas. When they return to connectivity, they could hit a button that would allow them to review and replay all or replay specific parts of the actions, the data transfers, the triggering mechanisms that they might have gone through as they were on their field-based process. We've actually got a great customer story of this exact sort of use case. It was a customer in actually sub-Saharan Africa. They were trying to build offline mobile applications in-house. As they were coming close to their deadline, they were realizing that they weren't going to be able to deliver it in time, so they came to us. And by using Boomi Flow, in about 8 weeks, we were able to deliver mobile applications that were offline enabled. These nurses go out into literally the field. They're collecting all sorts of data, and then when they return to home base, that data can all be resynced with the back-end systems. In this case, Salesforce and SAP. A huge part of those nurses' job was to manually enter the data that they had been collecting on paper throughout the day. So in this way, we've really streamlined their experience by having that single-click ability to resync with the back-end systems. Another area that this has been getting a ton of great feedback is customer service. You think about this ability to surface information and options with Flow's dynamic UIs, and that becomes very relevant for something like agent scripting. You might have a Flow pop open upon an inbound call coming in. It could filter that customer info by phone number and perhaps present the most recent info either as a flow in a standalone window or as a flow directly embedded within Salesforce. It does have the ability, when installed as a connected app, to generate a visual force page template. It creates a lightning component, and that can work across the Salesforce UIs and Salesforce tools. So you would be building these flows with the drag and drop interfaces that we were taking a look at, and then you could be embedding them in Salesforce with pretty minimal effort. It ends up being really a definition of the flow ID and the tenant ID, and the rest of the UI rendering is really handled by those template visual force pages and lightning components. One last area that I did want to call your attention to is the longer running sort of BPM type processes. Flow doesn't really seek to be the system of record, the repository for those sorts of tasks, but it does seek to augment such a system of record, and it plays particularly nicely with Salesforce in this regard. So if you have a 3-week or a 6-week process in which different departments are coming in at different times, even in which you would like to have 2 different individuals working through the same application together in real time, almost as a Google Doc, but for applications, that's certainly attainable with Flow. So to circle back around on how this all ties into Salesforce, I do want to give you a 30-second overview of the history of Boomi Flow. Now, this was an acquisition, as I mentioned, a little less than a year ago by Del Boomi of a company called ManyWho. ManyWho's roots with Salesforce are long and strong. The founders of that company built a company called Informavores that was acquired by Salesforce. It became the tool that's now Visual Workflow. They were technical leaders within the organization for a number of years before branching off to do this. They really had this vision, and they wanted to create this purest workflow layer that could really orchestrate and automate processes within Salesforce or processes that stand alone, processes that tie into a great many other tools as well. So The specific areas that Flow complements Salesforce in really strong ways are UI generation. You can be leveraging these React components and these responsive UIs generated by Bootstrap to present mobile applications that might leverage Salesforce at the back end, but that can be really saved on a mobile device. They can be interacted with on any sort of tablet, phone, or computer. It really excels at the collaboration layer, these long-running process orchestrations that might involve many different folks, many different departments. It does really excel also at the integration side. So you think of Dell Boomi as this powerhouse in the integration space. This is its bread and butter, connecting systems and syncing the data between those systems, that we can now fold a UI workflow layer over the top of that to present a human engagement channel. Becomes a really strong story, and it's been an enjoyable process to explore the integration side for me, having come from the workflow side. So we do have a Dell Boomi IoT booth in the IoT zone. We have a Boomi Flow booth over by the campfire. We also have a Dell Boomi booth in the main hall. I'd encourage you to swing by or visit us at boomi.com. And at this point, I'll wrap it up by taking any questions that you might have. I'll be around in the area as well. So if something comes up, please swing by our booth or catch me on the way off the stage. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Any questions? Well, cool. I'll be around. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the event.